Hi, you guys. Okay. Thanks. Get down. It's crazy here. All right. Here's what we're reading. The Mississippi burning case. We were on chapter 6. So many theories. Now, what's the theory of the government's case? Actually, isn't it a theory of this case here in Mississippi? This makes no sense. All right, can I just try to read this one more time? Actually, isn't it a theory of this case that here in Mississippi, that there is so much hate and prejudice in Mississippi that we hate all outsiders, and that there is a group of people here in Mississippi so filled with that hate that they conspire together and meet together and organize organizations to do away and murder outsiders that come into this state? All the times I've been engaged in this practice of law, I never knew a state of government in the presentation of their case to try to blow hot and cold in the same breath. No wonder the sentence didn't make a whole lot of sense. They got in here and they put Jim Jordan on the stand, and he sat up there with his eyes all bugged out, and he just rattles it off like that. Just exactly what happened, he said. Then the government, just a little bit later, brings statement and say you ought to convict somebody on which impeaches almost everything he said. I just don't see how the government can have so many theories of these cases and then represent to you there's no reasonable doubts, there's no mistakes. And that was said by H.C. Wilkins. Wow. Grammatically, there's so many things I'd say to that. But that's not what we're here for. Let's read this chapter. Less than 2 weeks after Barnett confessed, FBI agents served warrants on 19 men accused of collaborating in the murders of the young civil rights workers. All of them were Klan members, and several of them were law enforcement officers. Barnett, who by this time had recanted his confession, was also arrested. However, since murder was a state crime and thus something over which the FBI had no jurisdiction, the men were charged with the federal crime of conspiring to violate the civil rights under color of state law. Actual murder charges could only come from Mississippi, and not surprisingly, those were not forthcoming anytime soon. Furthermore, the federal government's charges failed to hold up for even a week. Just 6 days later, Commissioner Esther Carter of the U.S. Commissioner for the Southern District of Mississippi dismissed the charges, ruling that Barnett's confession constituted only hearsay evidence and therefore was not admissible. After the setback, Doer and the others took the case to a federal grand jury in Jackson. And this time, in February of 1965, Judge William Harold Cox dismissed all the indictments, and this is Cox right here, except those against Price and Rainey. And if you remember, they're the deputy and the sheriff. Determining that none of the other men had acted under color of state law. The prosecution appealed, and a year later, in March of 1966, so almost 2 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled, sorry you guys, allergies, really bad allergies. The Supreme Court ruled the present application of the statutes at issue does not raise fundamental questions of federal-state relationships. We are here concerned with allegations that squarely and indisputably involve state action with direct violation of the mandate of the 14th Amendment, that no state shall deprive any person of life or liberty without due process of law. This is a direct traditional concern of the federal government. It is an area in which the federal interest has existed for at least a century, and in which federal participation has intensified as part of a renewed emphasis upon civil rights. Even as recently as 1951, when Williams when Williams 1 was decided, the federal role of the establishment and vindication of fundamental rights, such as the freedom to travel, non-discriminatory access to public areas, and non-discriminatory educational facilities, was neither as pervasive nor as intense as it is today. Today, 1966, a decision interpreting a federal law in accordance with its historical design to punish denials by state action of constitutional rights of a person can hardly be regarded as adversely affecting the wise adjustment between state responsibility and national control. In any event, the problem, being statutory and not constitutional, is ultimately, as it was in the beginning, susceptible of congressional disposition. Following this decision, so that was the decision by the Supreme Court. Following this decision, the defense tried to allege that in what can only be one of the most egregious uses of irony in American history, that the first indictments were suspect because the grand jury issuing them did not have enough minorities. Instead of being sucked into arguing this point, the government seated a new grand jury, and on the last day of February in 1967, this is now 3 years later, one new indictments. This time, there were 18 Klansmen accused. Okay? So there were 19, now there's 18 accused. When the trial finally began on Monday, October 9th, 1967, 3 years after these boys were murdered, 350 men and women gathered together to see if they would be chosen as part of the jury. At Doer's request, they came from the entire southern Mississippi district, not just the 6 counties around Neshoba. Judge Cox, the judge, who had previously had his decision on the indictments overturned, was determined to have order and made sure that no cameras made it into his courtroom. Does that sound familiar? Because you're supposed to be thinking about the other stories that we've read. And do you remember, right? Emmett Till, do you remember the judge said, no cameras in this courtroom? Think about that. In front of the judge sat a total of 15 lawyers, Doer and 2 others on the prosecution side, and every member of the Neshoba County Bar Association on the other. The jury was seated with surprising speed. As Doer explained, we were looking for signs of intelligence. I had my guys look at everybody's homes. We were looking for homes that were well kept up. There were 7 women and 5 men, all of them white. The 17 African Americans who had been called were all struck by the defense. So struck means, nope, he won't do. Nope, she won't do. So not struck as in like hit, struck as in, nope, we're not using that person. So, again, thinking about the Medgar Evers case, right? It was a jury of all white men. Emmett Till, right? Jury of all white men. And now, this time, there are going to be women, but nobody is of color. Everybody is still white. Okay? The trial began in earnest, meaning that they were, they did their best, on Tuesday, when Doer stood to make his opening statements. He told the jurors, I hope very much that you will understand the reason I have come here. It's not because of any skilled experience that I am here, but only because I hold the office as head of the division with the Department of Justice, and it is my responsibility to try and enforce the law in which these defendants have been charged. The United States government felt it was essential that one of its Washington officials be here to speak directly and frankly to you about the reason for the extraordinary effort the federal government undertook to solve this crime, and to state to you 12 jurors why the federal government has assumed the role of prosecutor of this conspiracy involving murder. When local law enforcement officials become involved as participants in violent crime and use their position, power, and authority to accomplish this, there is very little to be hoped for, except with assistance from the federal government. But members of the jury, exactly what does that mean? It means that the federal government is not invading Philadelphia or Neshoba County, Mississippi. It means only that these defendants are tried for a crime under federal law in a Mississippi city. Before a Mississippi federal judge in a Mississippi courtroom, before 12 men and women from the state of Mississippi. The sole responsibility of the determination of guilt or innocence of these men remain in the hands where it should remain, the hands of 12 citizens from the state of Mississippi. Doer's first witness was the Reverend Charles Johnson, who spoke of Mickey Schwerner's work here in the area. His should have been a pretty simple testimony since it had nothing to do with the actual case, but defense attorney Laurel Ware turned it into a bombshell when he asked the witness, "Now, let me ask you, if you, Mr. Schwerner, didn't advocate and try to get young male Negroes to sign statements agreeing to rape a white woman once a week during the hot summer of 1964. The prosecution objected, and Judge Cox took great offense at the question, leading to the following damaging exchange. Cox said, "Who wrote the question? Whose question is this?" Alford, "Brother Killen wrote the question, one of the defendants." And remember, Killen, as I've noted to you here, he winds out being retried in 2005, okay? Judge Cox says, "One of the defendants wrote this question. All right, I'm going to expect some basis for the question since counsel has adopted one of the defendant's questions. And if there's no basis for it, when I get through, I'm going to say something about that. I'm not going to allow a farce to be made of this trial, and everybody might as well as get their heads, including every one of these defendants right now. I'll get this through their heads. Where, Your Honor, please, I will be more careful from now on about the questions. I ask, and I do beg the court to understand that on this particular occasion, I was trying to be diligent in obeying the court's orders, you know." And the judge says, "I don't understand such a question as that, and I don't appreciate it. And I'm going to say so before I get through with this trial of this case. So you can govern yourselves accordingly, and you can act just as reckless as you want to in asking questions like that. Go along. I'm surprised at a question like that coming from a preacher, too. I'm talking about Killen and whatever his name is." Doer recalled the effect the question had. The rape question was a tremendous blunder. It was the second big turning point. If there had been any feeling in the courtroom for the defendants, any courtroom that the defendants were invulnerable to conviction in Mississippi, the incident dispelled it completely. Cox made it clear he was taking the trial seriously. That made the jurors stop and think, if Judge Cox has taken this stand, we better meet our responsibility as well. Over the coming days, Doer and the others built their case slowly, piece by piece. Ernest Kirkland testified that he had met with the men on the day they were killed concerning the recent church fire. State Patrolman E.R. Poe admitted he had heard Price cry out gleefully, "I've got a good one," about 15 minutes before seeing Price with the men on the side of the road as they changed a tire in the station wagon. Dr. William Featherstone testified that the men had been shot. The white men through their hearts, and Cheney through his head. Oh. The most damning witnesses were 3 Klan members who testified about the extensive plans that had been made in the days leading up to the murders to at least do something to harm arriving activists. Doer later told the jury, "To understand this case, you must understand the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. In seeking members, the White Knights are reported to be a political organization, a nonviolent, peaceful group. But once the members were inducted, once the oath was administered, the members soon learned from Edgar Ray Killen that this was an organization of action, this was no Boy Scout group. It was here to do business. Dennis, who had left the Klan, was asked to re-enter and to penetrate the heart of the secret organization, and he did that. Okay, you guys, listen. So Dennis, I'm going to tell you who he is. Do you remember when we watched The Ghost of Mississippi? Do you remember the really big bald guy that they had to like go way out to meet, and it was in like this old it was like in a woodsy area, but there were remnants of like a building, and he was talking about Byron De La Beckwith and how crazy he was, and that he had told the guy that was trying Byron De La Beckwith, he said, I had a lot on Beckwith and I could have testified, but I knew more about the 3 boys in Neshoba County that were killed. And so the FBI used me for that. This is the guy they're talking about, this Dennis guy. All right? So see, there's your connection. Remember, we keep saying make connections to what we've already read, what we've already seen. And there's your connection. So Dennis, who had left the Klan, was asked to re-enter and to penetrate the heart of the secret organization. So he was to get really deep into the KKK, find out what he needed, because they needed him for this case. And he did. Members of the jury, the payment for information that these informers received for the risk they took, for the time they consumed, for the expenses they incurred, for the inevitable isolation when their role came out, was pretty meager. Their payment was made for value received. These men were not criminals. They played no part in this or any other conspiracy. And for the FBI, there was no other way to proceed. So I come here now to ask only that you do justice. This was a small secret militant group masterminded by a fanatic who had singled out Schwerner as a man who had to be eliminated, not to preserve or protect Mississippi, but rather to satisfy his own consuming hate. Of all those who testified that day, the most powerful witness was James Jordan, who testified at length about the case. When asked about being contacted by Killen, he told the jurors, well, we went in and talked to Frank Herndon first. Then he came back out and said he had a job and needed some help on over the Neshoba County, and he had needed some men to go with him. You guys, I think the baby's doing something he's not supposed to. Pause for 1 second. What are you doing? Get out of there. Get over here. Boobala. Oh, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Get over here. Brian? Okay. He's I'm sorry. I'm live reading to my students. But now I'm getting wet hugs. Hi. Okay. All right. Look, you guys. He's so cute. He's so cute. Come on. Come on. We've had the baby here for about 11 days now. And his mom was rushed to the hospital. She has COVID. She has pneumonia. She has the COVID pneumonia. So let's see if we can get this book done. Can you go in Babu's office? All right. I'm going to lock you in here. All right. Let's see if we can finish this. When he asked about being contacted by Killen, he told the jurors, well, we went in and talked to Frank Herndon first. Then he came back out and said he had a job where he needed some help on over in Neshoba County, and he needed some men to go with him. He said that 2 or 3 of those civil rights workers were locked up and they needed to get their rear ends tore up. Well, several more calls were made, and at that time, they said that they had 2 or 3 men on the way and asked me if I knew a couple that we might get, that we needed about 6 hours. 2 or 3 men. We needed 6 or 7 men. We needed some gloves, and I asked to stop by and see if I could find any gloves, any rubber gloves, which I couldn't at the time. We stopped at Warren's grocery store on the way to Wayne's house. I asked Wayne if he could go, and they needed some help on a case in Neshoba County, and that Reverend Killen was down, and could he get away to go. Mr. Atkins was here, Pete Harris was, myself, Wayne at the time. Then he said there were some more boys on their way, which they arrived in just a few minutes. Well, at that time, Reverend Killen said that they had 3 civil rights workers locked up, and we had to hurry and get there, and we were to pick them up and tear their butts up. He said that the highway patrol car would stop them on the outskirts of town. He said he would go ahead, as he had to get on back there as fast as he could and make arrangements. There were several cars were coming in, and these guys couldn't be held much longer. You guys, we are at 20 minutes, and I've promised you like 30 minutes between any journaling or connections that you have to make. So I'm actually going to stop there, and then I'll start another tape to finish the rest of this. So we'll do part 6 or chapter 6 in 2 parts. So give me time to get some dry clothes on this little guy who's playing in the water. Anyway, I hope you guys are all doing well. My life is very stressful. I'm very I'll keep it clean here. I'm stressed, okay? So hope you guys are well. At this point, I wish that we were back in school, because somehow it's a heck of a lot easier than what we're doing. Okay, now he's pulling fiber. I gotta go. Bye, guys.